Welcome to the FML podcast, the podcast on a mission to uncover actionable insights, explore the latest trends, and to catalyze your Fintech's growth. Join Growth Gorilla's founder and managing director, Shameer Sachdev, and some of Fintech's hardest hitting marketers and leaders.
Welcome everyone to today's episode of the Fintech Marketers and Leaders podcast. Today I'm joined by Julia Lucas, our Head of Influencer Marketing and Creative Strategy, and Ross Smith, our Head of Performance Marketing. Thanks both for joining me today.
You're welcome.
No worries.
I had no other choice.
Would edit that out. Today we're going to focus on how influencer marketing and performance marketing can help Fintechs grow. I think we'll just jump straight into it. So Julia, can you please explain to our listeners what influencer marketing entails and why it holds significance in the fintech industry?
Yeah, of course. In a nutshell, influencer marketing is when you have creators that already put their content out there and have a engaged following, become ambassadors for your brand and advocate for your product/service. That is, once again said though, in a nutshell, there's different variations to influencer marketing and how it can work, and best ways to apply to different brands and services. I guess for fintech is a great way to explain more about your product if it's not that black and white. Give customers more of an in about what it is that you do and how it can be applied to their day-to-day lives and serve them in a better way. It's a great way to reach specific audiences without being too salesy, I guess. It's more about community and conversating with your potential customers and leads. And yeah.
Cool. Let's discuss the need for larger fintechs, or arguably all fintechs really, to accelerate their brand's reach. How can the combination of influencer and paid media strategies help achieve this goal?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a number of times with different clients in different situations the impact adding influencer into the mix has had on an existing paid campaign. So to give one example, we were working with a crypto platform. They were live across 25 different markets in Europe. You could have picked kind of a priority list, a scale of which ones were the best performing and sort of ranked them 1 to 25. One of those happened to be Czech Republic, and that one was probably, if you were to rank them, maybe about 20th on the list in terms of performance. We're talking volume and CPA. These were app install campaigns. And the client had happened to, and at the time it was unbeknownst to us, had done like a very lightweight influencer test, and it was just one influencer in the Czech Republic, and pretty much overnight we saw Czech Republic rise from being about 20th. You could have put it about 3rd or 4th, just in terms of volume. So and that was on kind of an already successful paid media campaign. You know, we were getting a lot of volume in across those territories and having a lot of success, and sort of like I say, overnight it just really lifted the paid campaigns and moved the performance of that one territory on massively, sort of overnight. And then I think if you then flip that, whilst the influencer activity kind of drives conversions and performs in its own right, without paid, I think paid gives you that opportunity to amplify the message of influencer. So influencer is very, very effective, I think, in targeting sort of pockets of audiences. But you're kind of missing out if you're only targeting that pocket of audience by leveraging that really good, high quality content on all of your paid channels as well, and just, you know, amplifying it a little bit and getting it out there. We're starting to see now that UGC content is some of the better performing content now on the paid social channels. It's more engaging than using static image ads. It feels a bit more genuine. It's not kind of a brand shouting into a void on its own. So it comes across as being it's better socially proofed, and for that reason, yeah, it's coming into its own really. It's one of the better ad formats we've got available to us really on display and social, I think.
Yeah, I think it adds, I always talk about this, but it adds that human factor that a lot of paid ads lack. also it's a lot catchier when you see a face pop on your screen instead of like a static ad or even graphics or animation. It sparks conversation, and I think mixing organic influencer content with paid behind it kind of brings campaigns full circle. If you see an influencer talking about it organically and potentially it sparks your interest, you click on that brand's page, you go to their website or something, and then that leads into paid. And next thing you know, you're seeing that advertised to you in other social channels. Once you're reminded of that brand, it becomes first of mind. And secondly, it allows for brands to tell a story. So you don't need to be displaying the same content over and over again through organic and then paid. You can display different messaging through both. And it allows customers who are truly interested to grab a bit of both and have more understanding of that product / service and company before they make a decision to buy into that.
The bit we probably didn't mention there as well is cross-platform.
Yeah,
so I think
100%.
If you're working with a very TikTok-focused influencer, paid allows you to take that content potentially and move it across onto Meta as well. So there's no reason you can't take that content and leverage it elsewhere if you're running a wider sort of channel mix, I suppose. Yeah,
and that's very interesting because, for example, with TikTok, a lot of people stay on their For You page, which is content tailored to what you want to see and interact with, but not necessarily people that you follow. And so if you see an influencer piece there and you don't even necessarily need to follow that influencer, but you identify with it, and then you start interacting with more and more stuff around that niche, and then you go onto Instagram and you see an ad around the same thing, and then you go, oh, let me check that out. Let me see that brand. Let me DM a friend about it because it might serve them, and let me forward that over. And once again, it becomes that full circle kind of campaign.
So we've seen brands achieve a chain reaction of positive buyer feedback through influencer partnerships. Julia, could you elaborate on how fintechs can achieve this and the impact it can then have on their growth? I
think, and this is a great way to explain the difference between the effectiveness of influencer marketing and simply paid activity. Because with paid ads, you don't get that interactive factor to it. You don't really know what your customers are thinking. You may be able to track the journey, but very rarely they're going to comment on an ad and ask the right questions, engage with it, give you any sort of feedback. They might, but chances are they won't. With influencer marketing, that usually starts a conversation. People are more inclined to comment on an influencer's piece of content and ask about a certain product, a service, perhaps not the first time, but especially if you do a long-term campaign where the influencer is mentioning that brand over and over again and making it clearer through time as to how and why they use it. Followers are inclined to engage with it and perhaps say what they think about it in a negative or positive way, which then helps brands tailor, one, the content going forward and make it more succinct to their audience, and two, make changes if needed within their product or service, which is so, I guess, useful from a research point of view as well. And understanding your audience better, I guess it can only improve your product and how you market it to them.
I want to talk a little bit about sort of the place of organic marketing. You know, we're talking about influencer marketing, we're talking about paid marketing, performance marketing. Just want to touch upon the organic piece. There's always a school of thought of paid is very, very costly and really a brand wants to go organically. But in reality, that doesn't necessarily allow a brand to scale as quickly as they perhaps need to. Why is a purely organic approach not able to yield those kind of results that performance and influencer or performance and influencer could?
Okay. I think there's a couple things to touch on within that question. One, it's very hard to scale these days purely on organic, simply because one, platforms don't allow you to do so because they're businesses. They want you to put some money behind it so that if you're going to profit off of it, they're going to profit off of it. And it's just how the algorithm works. Of course, there are certain brands out there that absolutely nail organic and they manage to reach audiences widely because of the incredible content that they put out there, but it's not guaranteed and it takes a lot of work and time. If you're looking for quick fixes, you got to put some paid behind it. Now with influencer, it's considered, unless you use paid behind it, it's considered to be organic, even though you're paying that influencer to talk about it. That is separated, but the content in itself comes out as organic and is distributed organically, unless you use it for paid once again. But that allows for one, community trust and reaching specific pockets within your audience that just organic on your own social channels wouldn't. Customers tend to trust the opinion of others more than the brand's own. So if you're talking about your own brand, chances are customers are not going to take that as gospel as they would if an influencer was to talk about it. Now, of course, they know that the influencer is being paid to talk about certain things, but respectable influencers out there only really just talk about things that they resonate with. And if you are especially working with them long term, and they become ambassadors for your brand and you're integrating that product/service within their niche and they are an actual user, there's no reason for that audience not to trust it. And so I think in that aspect, it adds more than just doing the exact same thing with, let's say, an employee that's hired to create TikToks or anything like that. But I always think it's a combination of the three that will give you the best results.
I think you're not always in a position as well, right? Not every single brand's in a position where they can share that influencer content and then leverage their own reach because they might not have any. So you're limited by the reach of the influencers you're working with, and you might not necessarily have that immediate reach yourself to amplify the activity without doing paid. So I think in that situation, you rely on paid then to spread the word a little bit more. And also, to some extent, organic social, for example, it's not necessarily suitable for every brand. Like, do you want to hear from a mortgage provider every day? Probably not. I don't follow Halifax on social media.
Yeah.
So you probably struggle in some instances to kind of leverage your own reach because either you might not have any or it might not be realistically that appropriate. Sometimes that interaction can be like a one-time deal where you hit the person at the point of need and then you sort of step back and kind of let it go. So yeah, I think that's why if you're looking to scale, I think paid's going to always do a quicker job of that than just relying on organic.
Yeah, and that's why I think it should go full circle. But then I don't know if I would say I slightly disagree there, but I have a different opinion in the sense that I absolutely think that Halifax should be on social. Would I follow them unless they're being funny and witty and providing me more than just explanation on what it is that they do? Maybe not. But if I find them on social media through an influencer or a paid ad, chances are I will look for them on the same platform instead of going straight to the website. And if their organic socials are completely empty or very scarce, I'll take it as, well, I don't really know what's going on here. I also think brands, and especially fintechs, because they haven't nailed this at all in comparison to other niches, it's a great opportunity to show some personality beyond the product that you're trying to sell. A lot of products are similar and offer very similar things out there. Why would a customer choose to go with you if not for what you stand for? So I think organic socials are a great way to display that. Obviously, there's compliance, there's things that can and cannot be said. And I think with fintechs, a lot harder to display personality without going through certain hurdles. But it's still a great opportunity to do so. And I think the brands that nail that are always one step ahead.
Yeah, I think it's less about kind of looking at it from a very binary position where it's like bother or don't bother. Mm-hmm. I think it's more a case of, I mean, you might not have a tone of voice right where being jokey is really that appropriate. And if people are looking for some kind of entertainment medium online, like I say, they're probably the first place they're going to go is not necessarily going to be the profile of a financial firm. So I think it's kind of, you don't want to stray too far away from what you are. Don't kind of, for me, go on to Twitter and start interacting with other brands and trying to be funny.
Yeah.
If that's not who you are. I think you've got to be true to, if it's a serious finance product, stay that way.
I think a good example of this is, and kind of to take kind of both your points into consideration, I think a really good example is, I think M&G have been promoting their And Me product recently, and they've been doing influencer activity on TikTok, and then they've been doing whitelisted campaigns. So that's where we're promoting paid activity, but from the influencer's account. When you're seeing that activity, you then click on M&G or And Me or whatever their handle is, and you get there. And I think they had 4 or 5 posts that had nothing to do with the campaigns that you were seeing online, nothing to do with the campaigns that you could see in the tube. And my first reaction was, I went on there, I was like, this doesn't look like what they've been promoting. I'm just going to leave. So they failed to drive me down the funnel. It made them look disconnected, and they failed to capture me as a follower for their brand on TikTok. To your point, Ross, around it can be difficult for some financial brands to perhaps have a really engaged audience, but at the very least, if they've got some decent quality content that represents the sort of activity that they're promoting via influencers and paid, at least it helps me then develop trust with that brand and then push me down the funnel. Yeah. And I think that's kind of, that's a really, really good example of how not to do it, really.
Yeah.
I think the other thing as well is that I think, you're talking about obviously algorithms, not really supporting organic growth at the moment. I think one of the ways to sort of surmise a lot what both of you were saying is that fundamentally paid and influencer can kind of help seed that growth initially to begin with. And you need to drive in users from somewhere, right? And
yeah,
paid and influencer can do that for you.
And I was just going to say, just so that brands don't get discouraged, I don't mean it for everyone to be the likes of Audi or Ryanair and become super funny on socials or anything like that. I think it's very important to understand your brand's persona and the branding to a core, understanding that tone of voice. And if you're coming from a educational perspective or an expert perspective, there's ways to make that very engaging and add value to your customers when they come to your page. If one of your core values is that you consider your brand as a sustainable one, then there's multiple ways to engage with that type of content without just doing hard sales all the time around your product, and truly express what the brand's about and the values that it holds. And I think Ross was saying like, I would never follow that on social media. You may not, and I don't think it's about following count, but you might get some good quality engagement and conversations out there, because every now and again you have a customer come to your page. Like, I don't follow many brands that I really resonate with, but every now and again I'll check it out to see what's going on, and I do engage with it. So I don't necessarily need to be that all the time, but for as long as you're sparking conversation, then I think that's really valuable.
I want to start talking a little bit more about the practicalities of building out campaigns. But before we kind of jump into that, I just want to talk about halo effects and increasing consumer trust. So, Julie, can you kind of explain the concept of brand excitement amongst influencers, how it helps produce that halo effect, and really how it increases consumer trust?
I think it's kind of self-explanatory, and I kind of touched on this when I said, if a customer, it can be the same piece of information, the same messaging, but if I see someone that works for the brand talking about it, I'm way less likely to trust it if it's coming from the brand as opposed to the influencer. Just on a first touch basis. If I then become very engaged with the brand and I know exactly what they are about and I trust their product and I trust their service, then that's a completely different story. I now am an advocate for the brand, so tell me more. Like, I want to hear from you. But if it's a first search point kind of interaction, I'm more likely to trust an influencer that I already follow as opposed to the brand. So it starts from that. And even better if I see a few influencers in that niche talking about that product and service. So I think it's also very important to have influencers talk directly to a crowd as opposed to trying to sell a product as it would to serve everyone, everybody, every situation. I never buy into that because I'm like, how can this serve? Unless it's sliced bread, the greatest thing ever created on earth. I don't think it serves her. And even sliced bread may not serve. Like, we have gluten intolerant people, we have all sorts. So what I'm trying to say here is that pick your niche, and you can have multiple niches, you can have multiple messagings, you can have multiple influencers and touching on different sides of your business and why they would serve different crowds. Find influencers within that niche. You really want influencers that interact with similar audiences. You want to find the core audience there where they're following a couple people in common and they're going to see that product over and over again being distributed through slightly different points of view, but they all come together in a way, and that creates that boom effect where you see it over and over again. Is, let's say influencer A talks about a product in a certain way, influencer B talks about a product in another way, but they all come together. It's like, oh, I can use this platform for this, but I can also use that platform for that. And this way may not work for me, but I can find another way that it does. And it starts creating, once again, a story. I think influencer marketing is really about telling stories and making your product tangible. Especially with fintechs, it's very hard to make it tangible when you're selling a platform, a service, I guess the most tangible thing would be if we're talking about digital banks because you get a card with it. But even so, that's not really what you're buying into, is it? It's what it does for you. So if I then see a creator going on about, oh, this card allows me to travel and the interest rates are very low, or it allows me to spend on these many currencies, but it's also great for people to get loans. Like, there's so many nuances that you could tap into and tell a story that way and put functionality behind everyday content creation.
Again, talking about that halo effect and increasing consumer trust, how does that help paid marketing efforts?
So I think Julia touched on it around it not coming across as being very genuine and not trusting, a brand's view on itself. I think it's that age-old phrase, we'd all like to write our own reviews. For me, influencer is the trust pilot for the modern ages, I think. So it's a new way for people to both find something new, but also get an instant view on the experience someone has had on that product, with that service, whatever it may be, and make a judgment relatively quickly on the opinion of someone they trust. So it's kind of like, like I say, the trust pilot for the modern ages. And if you go back even further, people would have relied on the views of kind of family and friends, for example, and they'd have taken their lead on it. So I think it's the new way of working out whether a product is suitable for you and whether you can kind of trust that brand, really. It does come across much more genuine than, a brand shouting about itself.
I was just going to add, because I think what you said was very interesting. And speaking of the halo effect, there were instances where I've seen influencer content circulating. And if you go to the comments section, I then see influencers that have nothing to do with that campaign as of yet, commenting on it. Like, oh, I've started using that because, influencers follow influencers and they're users as well at the end of the day. And if brands are on top of it, you can then start working with those creators too. And it becomes a lot more organically because you didn't even have to reach out to them to talk about your product. they're already advocating for it, or at least interest in the product in a way, and then expand that, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for here?
Reach?
Not really. It expands on the
Authenticity?
yes. This is why we work together, because when I lack words, you have them.
I think as well, just on the halo effect, you can probably sum it up with one question, which is, what are you more likely to share? An animated video, made by a brand themselves, or a review that comes across genuine from effectively a third party that might be entertaining in some way and engaging. Which one are you more likely to share? I mean, of all the campaigns we run, you don't get really genuinely many shares of single images. For example, you don't get many shares of basic animated video with audio over the top, but you do get shares of user content. So that as well helps with the halo effect.
And it encourages people to create their own as well. So then you have authentic UGC, CGC, however you want to call it. For the ones of you that don't know, CGC would be customer generated content, because now UGC has become a thing where we put paid behind it. But it invites people to join the conversation, and that sometimes goes beyond the comment section. You might see users posting stories, sharing their own opinions on YouTube videos, TikTok, Instagram, you name it, starting Twitter threads around it. And that's usually sparked by influencer and UGC content. You very rarely see that happening coming out of a static ad or
any paid campaign, really.
Yeah.
So we talked, a lot about the fundamentals, the benefits, and the reasons why it's important for brands to leverage both influencer and paid and organic as well. What I'd like to do is just sort of talk a little bit more about the nuts and bolts, really, of building out a campaign that leverages all of these channels, and building out a campaign that leverages these channels that's effective and works. So we've kind of talked, before we sort of press record, I asked the question, what comes first, influence marketing or performance marketing? Where should a brand start? And I know you both can absolutely disagree on this, but I think that's great for a balanced view. So I'm going to let Ross start.
It depends, and there's no single answer. And sometimes you will fall upon the correct answer accidentally, or the correct fit. The example I gave earlier was the crypto platform. We were running paid before we ran influencer, and then had the experience of the effect influencer had. And then obviously we're able to feed back to the client, you need to do more of this. So that was a case of paid first and then influencer followed. Does that mean everyone should do it that way? No. It might help some people who perhaps have a list of territories they want to target, but don't, for example, have the budget to target all of those territories in one go. Might help you perhaps before you go ahead and do all of the hard work of going out there and finding influencers to work out which of those territories are your best ones. You could maybe leverage paid to do that first, for example, narrow down your geographical regions, and then do the influencer activity specifically within those regions and kind of help your paid campaigns out. So I think it depends on your situation, really. Paid can sometimes help refine where you're going to go with the influencer activity before you start doing the legwork of kind of getting in contact with all those influencers and all of that, because it's obviously, as you'll probably tell us, Julie, it's obviously a lot of hard work. So you could sort of leverage paid in that way first. Equally, if you're UK only and you have a relatively tight paid budget, but could perhaps afford to do some influencer first to get the ball rolling and give you kind of almost like a base to work from, there's no reason you can't do that either as well, in my opinion, And we worked with a trading platform in Indonesia.
Mm-hmm.
They had 200,000 users before we even put paid campaign live, all driven largely by influencer activity. And then we basically just came in to hoover up the rest with paid. But the benefit of that was a lot of the people we were showing ads to had already seen some of that content. So they'd got like a baseline awareness out there. So they were going in with CPAs that were much lower than if they'd gone in with paid to start with no support. So I think it's horses for courses, really. I can see the benefit of doing both, first or second.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of like who came first, the chicken or the egg sort of question. I think there's a few things to it. The same way that you were talking about, like if you have specific regions that you want to target, and sometimes it's easier to just go with paid. You could also argue that because of regulations, sometimes you can't target or advertise in specific countries, but you could run influencer activity in other countries where the influencer has an audience in a country that you can't advertise on.
Ooh, grey area. I like it. I like it.
So it really depends on the case. I do think the same way that if you have a small budget of sorts, I'm not talking that small, but you can't afford to not see results quite quickly. Sometimes paid is a bit better because influencer is a bit more of a long run game where you need to build awareness, trust, nurture that audience, and then it starts leading into conversion. It becomes full circle and you add in all the glory to it. Equally, influencer activity is so useful to kind of like redirect your messaging and see what the feedback is, and then kind of mold your paid content through that. So you could go that way as well. And if I want to throw a curveball there and talk about organic, I think that you should have that set up first.
I want to get a bit technical now and just talk about, I suppose, platform selection and also targeting audiences. So we've talked sort of, at a high level, which one should go first. And I think, you both sort of said it is very, very sort of dependent on, the company, what the objectives are and kind of all of that sort of stuff. But, let's take a situation where we've got an audience or a company that's got a target audience that's hard to reach. Particularly, for example, sometimes those audiences don't exist on paid channels. And that's really where influencer marketing can be really helpful, because actually we can go to an influencer that has that audience, get them to begin promoting the brand, the proposition, but then paid can actually piggyback off of that, can't they?
100%. I'm going to give everyone a little tip that they can use. If you do the influencer first, use a dedicated page, pixel that page, then go and use lookalike targeting based off of that page. You've got basically all of the people who are engaged by the influencer, which is effectively creating your target audience for you. You can then let's say Meta profile that user base and then go and find more people who look like them, even though the manual targeting options within Meta perhaps weren't there in the first place. So that's one way where you can kind of use influence to find those little pockets, those niche pockets of your audience. And that audience does it, so all of the followers for a particular influencer don't necessarily even need to be interested in your product, because the people who are really interested are going to end up on that page. So, and that's the key thing. And then you pick it up then through the pixel and the lookalike. So that's a really good way, for example, of trying to target a niche audience, or perhaps one you can't find just by doing the paid activity.
I mean, you can even refine that further, can't you? I mean, if you get enough volume coming through, you can even then only target those individuals that then click through on that page.
Convert, yeah.
And converted.
Yeah.
And that just makes it more potent, right?
Even your high LTV users, if you take it even a stage further, you need a lot of volume to do that, but there's no reason you couldn't.
The other aspect I mentioned was channel selection, and I think we kind of touched upon it a little bit earlier, which was, there's content being created, say, by an influencer on TikTok. We can then take that content, obviously, and then move that over to platforms like Instagram. But in the context of, I suppose, planning a campaign, I suppose what considerations are needed by both paid and by influencer for choosing the right channels to go after? And then, I suppose, how do we make sure that we're managing an effective relationship between the two?
There's a couple things to it. I think if you had all the budget in the world and all the time and resources, I'd say just be in every single platform, create a strategy for all of them, do all that you can, because you can always find particular audiences in all platforms. Like if done right, it can be done everywhere. But the chances are that you won't have all of that. So I'd start with what platforms you think resonate the most with your core audiences and with your messaging, with your brand's persona. When you're running an influencer campaign, where are those creators? Chances are, if you're working with creators on the platform, you should be there too, because it's very native for a user to migrate from that creator's content to your page on that platform as opposed to a website or an app straight away. They can, but personally, and I know most people do this too, if I see a piece of content on Instagram, for example, and a creator is talking about that brand and I feel interested and inclined to check it out, first thing I do is click on the handle that the influencer has displayed, like mentioning the brand. If that is not there, I might think, oh, okay, I'll check them out later, and later may never come. Even if there's a scroll, even if there is a check the link in bio, even if there is a CTA somewhere, if it's native to the platform for me to go within the platform, so you should be set up there. So I think that's it. The easiest way to go about it is, where are you hosting your activity? Make sure you're present there.
Yeah, paid's a little bit more difficult because, as you mentioned earlier, you're restricted by the targeting capability sometimes. So you're almost dictated to as to which platform's going to work best. But just because you're doing influence on one channel doesn't mean you've got to follow suit and do paid on the same channel. So if paid is going to work better on one because purely based on the targeting capabilities, that doesn't mean you can't do paid on one channel, influence on the other, and then, like we mentioned earlier, leverage the content across both. Yeah, there's no reason you can't do that as well. We've obviously always structured it. We've said on other podcasts in terms of, if we start from day one, we just use all of our experience and the kind of initial workshops and the brief to work out a hierarchy of channels that we think are going to work best, largely on the paid side based on CPA, which obviously is not necessarily as important from an influencer perspective, and then base them on that. And your CPA is going to factor in the targeting capability as well. Because if you can't target your audience very well, you're going to have to go broader, which means lower conversion rates, which means higher CPAs. So we tend to pick off the channels we think we can get the better CPA on, and then sort of go from there, really, with sort of more limited budgets. But I agree that you can probably find most audiences on any platform to some extent. It's just that some are better than others. I mean, if you take Reddit as the example, if you're a trading platform or a crypto platform, that's an ideal place to find those users. So, and then equally, they're more open to, say, advertising crypto than Meta would be. So from a regulatory standpoint, you can get on there a lot easier and run ads on there. So there's different restrictions in place across the two, but you can still use the content across both and still run both, not separately, but run both at the same time, but on different platforms, and still have success. There's no harm in doing that, I don't think.
I was just going to say something really quickly. I was going to say it makes sense when it comes to pay, though, because paid activity is more of a hard sale, right? You know, you're being fed an ad. Not to say that with influencer activity, you don't know that that's promotion as well, but it's a key message. Click here, find out more.
Yeah.
Buy. Well, you're being expected to be sold something, essentially. And in that sense, it makes sense for the CTA to guide you to a website, an app, anything like that. You don't necessarily need to stay within the platform. Now, with influencer, back to what I was saying, one is more native for people to stay within the platform, and two, and that's where organic comes in so beautifully, is that if I then end up on the company's page on whatever platform that is, it allows for the story to continue and information that I couldn't come across on the influencer's piece of content to then be fed to me through that brand's platform. And then even better, if paid comes along and you've tracked those people that had those interactions, and then later on that week, magically, an ad pops up, and next thing I know, I'm on the website and I am signing up.
I think, to the point where if we can't find a user, say on from targeting capabilities to target them via paid, that doesn't stop us then from, say, remarketing to that audience. Perhaps we're serving the influencer activity. So they could then be hit by, an influencer campaign on one side, hit the website and then remarket to them on that same platform, right? And I think the second thing as well is that, we're talking a lot about social at the moment, but just to touch upon paid search, if you're receiving ads, on social channels, or you're seeing, product promoted by an influencer on various social channels, the other element is that if you are then in market and you are searching relevant terms on Google, you could then see that brand promote a paid search ad, and that's going to improve your likelihood of then clicking through that ad and then signing up. And also as well, obviously, it should improve your brand searches as well, creating that ecosystem that you're creating multiple touch points with that user. I mean, my personal view is that particularly if you're a challenger brand, and you're focused on a niche or an audience, really what you want to be doing is hitting that audience as many times as possible on as many channels as possible, and just constantly just driving them down the funnel. We've kind of mentioned UGC a couple of times while we've been speaking, and I kind of want to drill down on UGC in detail. One of the methodologies is, for example, taking TikTok, basically, that's been produced by a creator, and then promoting that via paid activity on Instagram. And the reason we're doing that really is because we're seeing better results from promoting more native style ads. They're performing better than static ads, carousels, in-house produced ads. I suppose it's that middle ground between paid and influencer. So I just want to sort of, dig a little bit deeper on that. But before we really do that, Julia, can you just give us an overview of exactly what UGC is?
It translates to user-generated content, which started with actual user-generated content. And I think I touched on CGC now, which is the terminology being used for customer-generated content, because UGC in itself became kind of a pay thing. So you can pay people to use your product and talk about it and create content around it so that you can use it behind your paid channels and even organic. Whereas CGC, customer generated content, would be organic as opposed to you paying people to do it. And that's pretty much it. Unlike influencer content, where it's being promoted at a creator's channel and to their audience, UGC, you still have that human factor, but it's for brands to use it on their own channels, whether that's organic or paid. It's good because it adds, once again, the human side to things. It allows for it to be more engaging. It allows for you to tell a story and explain a product better than a static ad would, and sometimes even animation. It tends to be a bit more scripted because you're telling that creator exactly what to say. There's a specific message to it, as opposed to influencer content where it's kind of like the influencer's take on that product. Yeah, that's what it is.
A couple of misconceptions about UGC, and feel free to elaborate. I think one of the things is that when we are suggesting UGC creators to clients, they immediately start looking at the number of followers that they have, the overall sort of content that's on that creator's page, for example, and they'll say, "Oh, this creator might not be right for us," but because this creator is producing content that's going to be used on the brand's channels, that's not really relevant, is it?
It's because brands are still confusing UGC with influencer content. Don't look at the creator if we are to share their page, because a lot of UGC creators are also influencers. A lot of influencers do UGC on the side. Some of them are just purely content creators, or they don't consider themselves influencers. There's a whole ballgame and a list of features that a creator can have. If for some reason they do have a page where they advertise their content creation and a brand comes in contact with that page, don't look at, if from a UGC perspective, not an influencer, of course, But don't look into it as, oh, this is the kind of content they put out there. I'm not sure if that resonates with the brand. No. Are they outspoken? Can they send a message in a clean manner? Are they good at content creation? Are they a good fit for the brand in terms of, will the audience resonate with that creator? And not in terms of the content that they're putting out there. But so, for example, if it's a brand that sells products to an audience of 50 plus, your UGC creator should probably be 50 plus. If it's a campaign that's being ran in the UK, they should probably be a UK-based UGC creator. There's no point in having someone with an American accent, and so forth. But those are the characteristics that you should be looking at, as opposed to, oh, their content is way too tailored towards interior design, and our brand's not about that. That doesn't matter. If they can talk about a product in a good way, they can talk about a product in a good way. Of course, it helps if they already have some finance background and fintech experience and whatnot, but that's a secondary to UGC, whereas in an influencer market is a bit of a different story. I've been doing this as well to kind of stop that confusion, where we share UGC creators with clients. I've just, when I have access to it, I just send an introduction video, and I don't even share their pages with clients. It's just them saying, hi, this is me, this is what I do, this is what I can do for your brand. Because then it's kind of like a portfolio, just a casting call of sorts, which really is what UGC is.
I just want to talk a little bit about pricing for UGC content. Ooh. Yeah, it's I think it's an important one to touch upon, because it's a question that we come across a lot. How much is this going to cost me? And there's lots of variables to it. Could you talk us through that a little bit?
When it comes to content creation, influencer marketing, UGC, it's a bit of a no man's land. The creator, the influencer, they're going to price themselves how they think it's fair. Sometimes they overprice themselves, sometimes they underprice themselves, but like every service out there, it's up to agencies. I've sometimes overpriced themselves, sometimes underpriced themselves. It's the same. What I would say is that UGC tends to be cheaper than influencer marketing, as it should, because you're not leveraging off of that audience. You're going to have to put some money behind it if using it for paid purposes and not organic. With influencers, it's kind of like buying TV time. So you're buying to talk to an audience. With UGC, it's your audience that you're going to talk to, or the money you put behind paid. So that in itself makes it cheaper. But then on a secondary thought, what's the quality of that content? That really needs to be factored into it as well. If it's a good production piece of content, if it's very straightforward, if it's just a green screen, all these factors need to be considered to price it fairly.
I want to start talking about paid leveraging UGC very, very quickly. I just wanted to highlight, you mentioned obviously as well that UGC can be used on organic channels. So it's also a great way for brands to bulk up their organic content, especially if they've got, say, restrictions or blockers internally in terms of producing content on their side. I mean, that's great for a brand, for example, that wants to get on TikTok, but perhaps they haven't got a willing volunteer who's, wants to dance in front of a camera, but also perhaps, if they've got a technical product and they want to get a high quality individual to talk about, say, tax planning, for example, and they want to promote that on their Instagram channel as well. But moving more into sort of the paid territory, I think, Ross, it would just be great to get kind of your take on your experience and your team's experience with leveraging UGC versus perhaps, more traditional ads that we've put on social channels in the past.
We'd already mentioned earlier on that the social proofing element and how it comes across more genuine. So that's point number one, and there's no need for us to, I don't think, cover that again too much. But the other thing with UGC is, and the influencer channel in general, not just the creative produced by it, is it has the ability to take someone from the top of the funnel to the bottom of the funnel very quickly, which is a much harder task to do with your more traditional paid ads. So you can go from someone being a completely cold, let's call them a cold lead, bit of a B2B term, call them a cold lead. You can move them from cold lead to converted from one piece of UGC content in some cases, which you can't necessarily do with, again, your single image ads or an animated video because it doesn't have that genuine, native, social proofed feel to it. So where we see the UGC content performing better, it's generally because you can move people from cold to converted much, much quicker than you can with your more traditional creative. That doesn't mean to say you shouldn't do a mix of everything, of course. Don't just go out and run UGC and nothing else. That's also true with testing. When we're testing different creatives, we often focus on which ad is the best performing one, and then whether everything should be paused down to that one creative, and then every single banner to become that color or that format or that. And that is 100% what you do not want to do. So even though one ad type, ad format doesn't necessarily convert as well as another, you've still got to have that mix. Maybe spend less on it or find its place in the funnel. So do you do single image ad on your remarketing, for example, and then utilize the UGC on engagement where you know you can move them right to the bottom very quickly, which is generally where we've tended to find the best results, really.
You know, when's the best time for a brand to start leveraging UGC in their paid activity?
Again, I think it comes down to how early in your strategy you started doing the influencer activity. If you started doing influencer first and that content's already sat there, for me, there's no reason why you couldn't just leverage it from day one and then include it in your testing alongside all of the other formats, really. It would almost be silly not to if it's sort of sat there. So for me, there's no reason in going straight in with it. But because of that time element involved in building the influencer side and finding the right influencers and working out which influencers' content is better and is resonating better, you might want to do that piece first and perhaps go live with something a bit quicker on paid. You can produce, for all of their faults, static banners much quicker than you can anything else. So they've got their advantages and their strengths. So maybe you'd want to, if you need to move fairly quickly, do that first and then introduce the influencer stuff afterwards once you feel like you've nailed the influencer side. It's really difficult, I think, to kind of have a paid campaign live and then go, right, let's introduce some UGC having done zero influencer. You're trying to shoot the moon. You've got to find the right influencer to produce one standalone piece of content to then go out and get a result. Whereas if you've got a backlog of creative and you know roughly which ones resonate, even just which ones you like, not necessarily which ones work, it's much better to then pick and choose from kind of a catalogue of creative and do it that way. So I think it can work both ways. I can see the advantages of doing both, really, but I think most of it comes down to how much influencer creative you've got versus how much time you've got as well, and how quickly you need to move with things, really.
I mean, if a brand doesn't have budget to perhaps do both influencer and paid, I think it's important to say that they can still run UGC creative without having influencer, but they've got to just bear in mind, obviously, that there is a time factor, to your point around kicking off with static ads or carousel ads or similar to begin with. There's still a time factor in sourcing UGC creators. And there's a lot of platforms out there as well, and we've seen mixed results with the sort of stuff that's come out of those platforms. Sorry, we're chuckling away here because some of them were horrendous. There's a time factor attached to that. It still needs to be briefed in. It is very, very similar to production of a traditional video ad that you're putting together. The fundamental difference being, though, is that you're briefing in the creator who's going to do the video production and everything themselves. But to your point around having that catalogue, we sort of see, a brand turn around and go, yeah, let's do some UGC. And, we'll go, okay, well, probably worthwhile getting 2 or 3 versions down with perhaps, a couple of different creators and a couple of different messages to get a baseline. And they go, oh, let's start with one. And that's very, very similar to just sort of saying, well, let's just start an entire campaign with one ad, one static ad. And I don't think that's, sensible or realistic either. So I think there's got to be, a bit of a catalogue that, if you're not in the fortunate position that you can run influencer or you have been running influencer, but you do want to do UGC, it's just some considerations to take into mind.
To use a football analogy, you just play long ball. the reason I love influencer is because it provides all the assists. If you've got 2 really good wide players providing all of the assists, paid becomes a tap-in. And it makes our job really easy. And it makes us look good. Thanks, Julia. But if you don't have the benefit of having 2 really good wingers, you just got to lump it forward, right? Get your centre-backs just sticking it right up there and let the striker do his thing. So we might have to work a bit harder on paid because, we have to produce content that might not immediately resonate with a cold audience, for example, perhaps lack those lookalike audiences that you can leverage from influencer and things like that. But it doesn't mean to say you can't do it. You just have to adapt your tactics to what you've got available to you, really.
Absolutely. So a couple of points I just want to touch upon before we wrap up. One is just want to talk very, very quickly about whitelisting. So Julie, do you mind just giving us a very, very sort of quick and concise overview to what whitelisting is?
Whitelisting is paid activity and influencer combined. You can do both without doing whitelisting, by the way, but it's when you use a creator's channel to advertise on through paid ads. So it won't even necessarily show up organically on their channel. So for example, if I were to go to an influencer's page right now, I won't see that piece of content on their feed, but it will come as a paid ad somewhere along the lines of my feed as an ad, but it will come from the creator's channel, not the brand's own. And you run it just like you run any ad. You put it as an ad and it comes out of the influencer's channel instead, which just adds a bit more credibility to it because when people see that, they won't immediately associate it with I'm being sold something, even though they pretty much are.
What are you guys' thoughts on when a brand should think about running whitelisting campaigns?
First of all, you have to have some sort of relationship with that creator already for them to allow you to do that. I think it's very unlikely that a creator will allow you to whitelist on their channel if you don't have a relationship in place and they're not already an advocate for you. Also, it'll come as disingenuous as well if all of a sudden there's an ad out there on a creator's channel and the brand so far has done no work with that creator. So I think a good place to start is do traditional influencer marketing with that creator, and along the lines, definitely whitelist, especially if the responses have been positive and the relationship is going far. Then I think that's the right moment to do it.
I think where I've seen that personally, when I worked for Genting in the gaming space, you'd get a lot of streamers online would stream themselves playing slots, and they would have kind of a partner site that they would play those slots on. Every now and again, someone would come in with a bigger offer and they'd switch the platform that they played on. But they had a loyal following on YouTube of people who'd been watching those videos for a long time and had become accustomed to them playing slots on that particular site. And then it's very obvious when they switch that they've switched because they're getting paid more money to. So their loyal following is a bit like, well, I'm not just going to go and create an account on that one. I'll just carry on using, I'll carry on using the platform you were originally playing on if that's all right. But the new users would obviously come in not realizing, and then you would get the benefit of the new users coming in and following them and watching. I think that does come across a bit. It can almost be very obvious that they've transitioned from pushing one thing to another, like with cryptocurrencies. Like it's just the latest coin getting shilled. And it's just a bit obvious. You can see straight through it, really. So
to kind of wrap up, I think a few takeaway points for listeners, really, kind of running through what we've spoken about from an influencer marketing perspective, sort of key points you'd like listeners to take away.
Make sure you're in for the long run. Influencer marketing is not a quick fix as much as I would like it to be, and for everyone to convert straight away and for us to make loads of money. Make sure you're working with creators that resonate with your brand and your ethos, and vice versa. I think a lot of companies make the mistake of working with influencers solely based on their following and engagement. And although those are very important factors to consider, if they don't speak a similar lingo to your brand, and if the audience is not really interested in your product, it will never work. And then 3, make sure to implement some organic strategy in place, especially if you're going to go for influencer marketing, because it comes full circle.
Amazing. Ross, your key takeaways?
I would say just because you're doing influencer on one channel doesn't necessarily mean you can't use that content on other channels and maximize the exposure you get from that ad. And then I would also say the reverse. Just because you're doing influence on one channel, don't get bogged down in only promoting on that channel. Try and broaden your horizons a little bit and take that elsewhere. And then also try and game the system a little bit, try and hack things a little bit by utilizing things like custom landing pages and lookalikes, and try and move the influencer audience away from influencer and over to your paid campaigns in any way you can, really, be it remarketing, be it lookalike, whatever it might be. And try and leverage the best of both channels to create that kind of joined up strategy.
One of my key takeaways is leverage UGC. I think it's really important to do so. Allows you to, Ross, as you said, drive users down the funnel far more quickly, far more efficiently, adds a face to your campaign and your marketing activity. There's even better engagement than perhaps traditional static or animated ads. And I think also for brands that don't perhaps have the budget for producing live action videos or live action ads, it's a great way to do that and get someone else to do all the hard work as well. Julia, Ross, great conversation. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
The FML podcast is brought to you by Growth Gorilla. To find out how our marketing growth experts can boost your Fintech's growth, head to growthgorilla.co.uk. And make sure to search for the FML podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Growth Gorilla, thanks for listening.